Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. My email address is jason@sportspectrum.com. I'd love to hear from you. Any feedback you might have, any guests, ideas for the show, email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. And we are presented today by Ronald Blue Trust, one of our newer sponsors here at Sports Spectrum. Their advisors applying biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy. They can help you in your financial needs. I promise you that. Check them out at ronblue.com. Today on the show, we welcome Morgan Snyder to Sports Spectrum. Morgan is an author, teacher, speaker. He's got a new book out called Becoming a King, The Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. It released back in May 26th. The foreword was written by John Eldredge, who was on this book, the famous author and Wild at Heart, Ransomed Heart Ministries founder. Morgan Snyder, his passion is to be both shaped by and shape the men and women who are shaping the kingdom of God. In 2010, Morgan established BecomeGoodSoil.com, a fellowship of leaders whose global reach offers guidance for the narrow road of becoming the kind of person to whom God can confidently entrust the care of his kingdom. Morgan's a really smart guy and a really thoughtful guy. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going to go, other than we were going to talk about his book and the idea of restoring the heart of a man. And really, that's the theme of the entire conversation, where we talk about some of the protests that were happening recently, certainly with the terrible death of George Floyd in Minneapolis back in late May and early June. We also talk here with Morgan about the heart of a man when it comes to sports parenting. For us as dads, some of the challenges that we face with sports parenting. And Morgan also takes us back into his struggles being the odd kid out when he was younger, and how sports really helped shape him for good and for bad. And this was a powerful conversation. It really was. We talked about men mishandling power, athletes having power at young ages, and why so many mishandle that, athletes trying to grow in maturity. This was a fun conversation, really deep conversation, one that I'm going to go back and listen to multiple times with my notebook and pen, because Morgan Snyder has a lot of great things to say. Take a listen to author Morgan Snyder in his new book, Becoming a King. He joins us here today on Sports Spectrum. Morgan Snyder, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Jason, great to connect with you today. It's an honor and privilege. Excited to dive into this with you.
Absolutely. Me as well. Really excited and intrigued by your book, Becoming a King. It's the new book. I want to start maybe actually with the subtitle, The Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. As we tape this, and we're taping this in June, in the midst of a pandemic and in the midst of a divide, if you will, in our country, especially with all of what's been going on from a race front. The hearts of many men are hurting right now, racially, social injustice, and all that at the forefront right now here in the early summer. How much of in your opinion, do you see what's going on right now as coming back to the idea of what you write in your subtitle and it being a heart issue? Can you kind of start there maybe a little bit?
Yeah, Jason, I was prepping for our time together today, and I just got on Google and I searched the news. And what I was aware of is the top 10 stories. And this is a normal day, right? We always live in interesting times, but it was a normal query. And of the top 10 stories, 7 of them, the theme was men mishandling power.
Wow.
It's just so fascinating if you bring it down to the base level of the symptom of its power mishandled. The question is, how do you handle power? And if we think about our lives, most people have a story about a coach, right? If you just think about that coach in your childhood and you pause, almost every one of us have a vivid, emotive experience when we ask, what was the impact of that coach? And generally, our memories are very good or very bad, right? Like there's something that sticks. It shapes us. It's absolutely significant. And I believe that at the center of design, when we go back to the story from which every story came, and we're born out of the Trinity, and God says there's this fellowship, this heroic fellowship, and they say, let us make man, humankind in our image. And so male and female, he created them. And he set them with the most audacious task. He said, rule, subdue, exercise my heart and my character over all of creation. And so I believe the first task given to man and woman was rule. Would you exercise dominion? And the story that mostly plays out, as Dallas Willard said, the primary work of God is entrusting men with power. And the story of most men is being entrusted with power, most coaches, and bringing harm to themselves and those under their care. And so the question is, how do we recover design? Not to lose the design that we were intended to be entrusted with power, but how do we recover a path and a process that allows us to become the kind of men, the kind of fathers, the kind of coaches in whom God is glad to entrust more and more of the care of his kingdom?
You're speaking sports terms there when I really hear about the word power, because, and you mentioned it with coaches, it's not just coaches though, athletes, even people in broadcasting, the broadcasting world, whoever it is that has gained a large amount of power,
Right.
I've seen that can abuse that, or they can use that for good. And I've worked with a lot of athletes, especially those who are believers and a part of our ministry with Sports Spectrum, who are using the power, if you want to call that word power.
Yes.
I don't even think they like to hear that word, but it's what it is.
Of course not.
It's platform, it's power to point people to good. But you've got to have seen a lot of what you've shared and talked about in Becoming a King, which I want to go deeper into the book in a minute, and how that really can portray into and infiltrate into the sports world, right, with athletes.
Well, it's a fascinating storyline when we look particularly in sports, because what happens in a way that's very magnified in sports is you do have young people and young men particularly entrusted with way more power than they have capacity to handle it with great care, to handle it in love, because you have extraordinarily gifted human beings, right? Sports call out these people with incredible God-given gifts and strengths and talents. And through the recruiting process and the money in the industry, in the prestige, you have these guys with huge platforms. And because someone is amazing on the field does not necessarily qualify them to be this amazing mentor, right?
Yeah.
But the world doesn't assume that. The world assumes if someone can do this unbelievable slam dunk, then they must be an amazing human being. And what's unfortunate is they are pushed, they are propelled up into these places of power, but they've not yet become the kind of person that can handle it. And so what happens is under the compression, they make mistakes. It goes sideways. And it causes great harm because of the leveraging of power. And so it's really an unkind ask to take a young man, even if he's young in his soul, and entrust him with such incredible power. You know, Albert Einstein once said that technology is like a razor blade being put in the hand of a 3-year-old. Technology is a powerful thing.
He foreshadowed pretty well there, I'd say.
Isn't that amazing, right? You think of these kids holding the iPad, or the little kid next door neighbor of us that calls it the Pi Pad, right? He runs around with his Pi Pad. And you say, you know how to use that thing, you know? And most men fight bravely on the field. They fight bravely and they die quickly.
Yeah. I mean, think about young athletes, 18 years old. I think of LeBron, who comes to mind right away, and who was 18 years old and had been declared the savior of the NBA, and he's given $30, $40, $50 million right away, and he's just 18 years old. And I got to say, he's one of the few that have handled that power, I think, in a really amazing way. Forget the idea of whether he's a believer or not from a spiritual perspective, but just the way that he's never been in trouble. He stands up and he speaks and he uses his voice, and he's giving back and helping kids and building schools and trying to make a difference while also dominating a sport that he's played for 17 years now at a really, really high level. But he's the he's the exception to the rule here, I feel like, because there's a lot of guys who are 18, 19, 20 who are suddenly becoming millionaires. And I don't know about how you were at 18 or 19 or 20, but I was an absolute mess. And suddenly you're given that power, right?
Right. Well, and what's so missed often in the Christian community is the process of maturity, the process of initiation. You know, we don't think about, for example, Jesus, we hear he's perfect, right? He was fully human and fully God, so he was without sin. But also, there was a time in Jesus's life where he was immature. Mm-hmm. That's different than sin. Jesus pooped his pants, right?
Yeah, right.
Someone wiped his butt. Yeah. Okay. He had to grow up at 12 years of age. He's in the temple preaching, and that's amazing. But the part that we skip over the story is for 3 days, his parents couldn't find him. He's freaking out. Why didn't Jesus tell his parents, I'm going MIA? And I would offer, because he didn't think about it.
Right. He was 12.
He was 12 years, right? That's not sin. That's immaturity. And the scripture says we need to grow in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. I remember when I was walking through the formation of this message, now I want to say it was like 15 years ago, Tiger Woods was a huge hero of mine. Yeah. I was passionate about golf. That was one of my sports in high school competitively. And he was a hero, an African-American, and I just emulated him. And I remember seeing this billboard. It was a watch billboard of some Rolex or something, and it's just a picture of Tiger looking in his eyes, and all it said is, what are you made of? And I just remember thinking, now that's a real man. I want to be like him. Fast forward, crashes his car in the middle of the night, crashes his life. Too much pressure. Well, when you go to hear his story and you understand the pressure that he was under from his dad to perform, it was a lot like Andre Agassi. His autobiography is just incredible story of a wounded man, a boy inside a man's body, being entrusted with too much power. You know, Lance Armstrong, one of my heroes. I love road biking and did competitive rides out in Colorado. And he was a hero of mine. And to find out that he cheated on every tour, even lying to his own kids. But I look at that story with compassion, Jason, because when you unpack his story, what you find is a fatherless boy, extraordinarily gifted, a never give up attitude. I have to win at all costs. He's raising his mom, right? He becomes the man of the family, and he's in such a fiercely competitive world. The answer for most people is you have to cheat to win. Right? It's like he tries to describe, you don't understand this culture. If you're going to win the tour, you're going to cheat. It sounds like that was the culture of the time. And so with that kind of pressure, the question is, if you don't engage in a process of becoming wholehearted, becoming a trustworthy king, eventually the leverage of power is just too much for any man that's living an independent life.
Yeah, he is Morgan Snyder, the author of the new book, Becoming a King, The Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. Let's go a little bit into the book, why you decided to write it, why this topic, where it stems from. You kind of alluded to it a little bit, but share with us kind of the heart behind becoming a king and what becoming a king is.
Yeah, I think I'd have to start, Jason, back in my childhood, you know, where sports first intersect. I was a severely overweight kid, fattest kid, like size 36 pants in fourth grade. And what that means in the suburban world is you play soccer, but you're the goalie. Yeah. And you can't ever fit in the issued shorts. And so I wore sweatpants when all the kids wore shorts. In baseball, you're the catcher. There's no way the issued pants in baseball are going to fit you. So I'm wearing gray sweatpants when everyone else has skinny white baseball pants. In basketball, that means you're on the bench. And the story I remember were coaches that I was a problem. I was in their way. Fundamentally, the coaches were dads of other kids, and they were there mostly bringing their own question. Not spoken, but subconsciously, I feel good. I feel like a man when I win, because every man wants to win. Yeah. And I want this team to win. The Mean Green Machine will dominate under 8 soccer. So help me God, right?
Right.
And so there we were going for the world championship title for under-8 soccer, and I was in the way. I was an obstacle. And that was just the formation of my story. You know, my dad was a really good man, but he was a professional that was gone and grew up very poor. His dad grew up very poor, and so he was really chasing security as a form of love to answer his own questions and to provide for his family. And so I was looking for the orientation, like, where do I become a man? And I don't feel like a boy. I'm not a man. So I swung from heavy obesity to pretty severe anorexia, and I became a runner. And I chose the solitary sport of competitive running on my own, right? Like long distance, half marathon, marathon. And it was all a reaction and a fruit of being a boy looking for a father, looking for men to initiate me into a process. And so fast forward, in college, I had a radical conversion where I gave my life to God, and it was a genuine shift into a trust and a confidence in God. But here's what happened. What I found, I was a man on the outside, but I was still a boy on the inside. And so I'd find myself in these situations where I said, I love God, I trust God, but I still don't know how to handle myself. And the next 20 years of my life was the story of moving west and engaging in a process where I invited God to be my father, to be initiated by a father as a son, and to be initiated as a man. And through that process, a lot of it was adventure sports in the mountains of Colorado. And it was recovering an ancient path. It was recovering through seeking counsel through older, trustworthy men, some 75 sages and guides, a few of them coaches, trustworthy ones, that helped me recover the ancient path, that helped me recover this upside-down kingdom where the first shall be last, where slow and steady wins the race, where you have to excavate before you build, where instead of building your own kingdom, your own team, your own bank account, your own platform, you must choose to take the time to become the kind of person that can handle it. And so over the last 22 years, I've walked with John Eldredge, and we fought for the hearts of men all around the world. We have the privilege of shaping some coaches in some pretty cool roles. Yeah. And what I've recovered is that there is a way, and it's rare, but it's made available to all, and there is a path that leads to life.
We'll get back to our conversation with Morgan Snyder in just a little bit, but want to tell you some more about our friends at Ronald Blue Trust, the company's certified financial planning professionals offering comprehensive financial planning and investment management services based on biblical principles to individuals and families across the United States who are beyond the debt problem stage but want to be good stewards of their wealth. Check them out at ronblue.com. And right now, there's so many of us maybe coming out of the situation with COVID-19 financially, maybe trying to wonder, where do I steward my money? What does giving look like? What does the future look like financially for me and my family? Ronald Blue Trust is a great place to turn to. And listen, they have that word in there, trust, for a reason, and we trust them. They are wonderful partners with us here at Sports Spectrum. Many of our athletes and a lot of the players that you've heard on this podcast have their financial planning done by Ronald Blue Trust. And you can too. If you want to learn more, check them out at ronblue.com. ronblue.com. Now back to our conversation with Morgan Snyder, the author of the book Becoming a King, joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. So this book, you're an author, you're a teacher, you're a speaker, certainly working with John Eldredge. What did 19, 20, 21-year-old Morgan Snyder want to be when he grew up? Did you have a dream? Obviously, maybe your dream was to be in ministry and kind of doing the work that you're doing. But usually that dream consists of something else for a lot of people. What was the immature 19-year-old boy inside the 19-year-old man that was Morgan Snyder? His dream, what was it? Was it to be Lance Armstrong?
Oh man, those were my heroes, right? I remember, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, we went to as many games as we could. We would scalp tickets and buy and sell illegally in the parking lot till we could scrape up enough cash to get in the stadium. And I've got a lot of stories I can't tell on air now. Understand. But Jason, as a young man, the sentence, if you could peel back the layers, the sentence you would have found in my soul is, I am loved when I achieve.
Absolutely.
I am loved when I achieve, right? And so I threw myself into sports, but I was the fat kid. And so then when I got anorexic, I threw myself into individual sports. But I knew that wasn't going to be the achievement, and just that intoxication of where do I feel alive? And so what worked was women and leadership. That was my thing. I was a gifted leader, and I found myself taking my question to women. This is like in, middle school, high school. And so my dreams were, I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be a CEO of an influential company, and I'm going to marry a Southern belle. And that was my storyline. And that's what I chased. And I remember, Jason, I won that story through high school. I won 4.23 GPA, student government president, Barbie doll girlfriend. And I remember looking in the mirror, and I looked back at the eyes of a man that felt like I had no soul. I knew the verse in my body, he who gains the world and loses his soul. I remember going to bed the night before I left for college with fear. If I die tonight and I meet God, I have nothing to say for my life. And I had tricked the world, right? I played the game of school and I won. I played the game and lost my soul. So I knew it was God. And so I headed on a wild adventure. And so what I got out of college was a passionate relationship with God, and married feminists from the Midwest, and no promises of riches. Yeah. And I've never been rich monetarily a day in my life. But what I found was that gifting to be a leader, to be a shaper, is from God, but it needed to be healed, it needed to be matured, and it needed to be put in the service of love.
I want to ask you about sports parenting. I know you and I were talking off air before we started, and you're a dad to Joshua, 16, and Abigail, 13. Now, we could do a whole nother podcast on parenting teenage girls, because that's what I have. Mm-hmm. I have one.
Buddy.
She's 16, and I could give you heads up, some warnings on what's about to come in a few years.
Please.
But you also have a 16.
Where were you last year? I needed the warnings earlier.
I will. We'll spend some time after the podcast and talk.
Awesome.
But I want to ask you about parenting as a sports parent to your son. I know you told me Josh is a football player. He loves sports, and being 16, that's a really formative age for a young man as they come into that next phase of adolescence into manhood, really. Tell me about some of the challenges that you've seen and experienced, maybe yourself, but even in others, in being a sports parent and in today's age. It's hard.
Oh, it is. It is so hard. Yeah, we could talk a lot about this because it's an important question on several fundamental levels, but I've had front row seat to it. My son is a brilliant athlete. He's a beautiful, well-trained, disciplined, joy-filled lacrosse player, football player, and he loves it.
Yeah.
It's his core passion. And I have to be a student of my heart as a parent. I have to be curious to say, what's going on inside of me? What's that about? What's my motive here? Because here's what I observe. I get fired up. I mean, I'm intense. I'm a volunteer for the chain gang for football, and I do it because I'm required not to talk. And I know when I'm in the parents, I'm out of control. I lose weight. It's a workout for me when I'm cheering for these kids, right?
I can relate.
I might as well be on the field, right? But here's the problem. When a parent is uninitiated, in other words, when a parent has not passed through their own initiation as a man or as a woman, when we have not answered our question, so often what we find are parents using their kids subconsciously to answer their question. Parents want to feel good. It's unbelievable to see the news stories of parents as coaches getting in fistfights at Little League games, right? It's not about the sport, but we have to look at those stories with compassion, because you go, why the energy? Well, when you have a man taking his question, do I have what it takes? Am I a real man? If I win this game, then my report card, I get an A. And if I don't win this game, I'm a failure. And so my kid is an object that could be in the way, not just of my success, but actually of my identity. And so when we're under this pressure, then you put the layer of, I've graduated. I was in the decade of pushing our kids around, right? It's little league. We're the coaches with flag football and putting them in the bike trailers. And now we're the bleacher parents. We now have kids old enough that we're all getting overweight, watching our kids and paying a bunch of money. Yep. I'm in the overweight decade now, right? I have to fight to go get my own workout when they're playing sports.
Absolutely.
But I watch these parents and they're shelling out money. We pay so much money, and the travel teams, and even we are pretty non-typical parents. We don't say yes to all the stuff, and still it feels like it's 6 days a week. And so when a parent is unfulfilled in their work, they're unfulfilled in their spirituality, they don't feel good in their body, they don't have much going, and there's pressure to feel good, the kids are in a very dangerous and precarious position.
Yeah, it's a scary place to be. I remember my daughter, when she was 10, started playing softball, and it was just something she wanted to try. And I was all for it because I'm a baseball guy, a sports guy, whatever she wanted to do. I was fortunate that I wasn't like pushing her. I'm probably fortunate that I had a daughter and not a son, just being quite honest, because of the sports that's embedded in me. I didn't push her as much, but she started playing softball and she was pretty good. And she got it really quick and, made the all-star team in her first ever year. And I was like, really? This is happening? But my wife and I would watch, and she had to sit next to me, and she's watching me as a fan, kind of like what you described, as a parent, as a fan. And I'm like, what is that ref doing? What is that umpire? How does he not see that? That's clearly a strike, ref. You got to see that. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm a leader in my church and I do this podcast or whatever. And my wife had to slap me silly a little bit and say, you need to just be quiet. So what I did, Morgan, was where possible, I became either the chain gang guy, like you said,
way to go,
or I became a coach and I helped volunteer to be an assistant coach with her teams, which allowed me to talk, but not be condescending as a fan sitting in the stands, because I know that's hard. That was hard for me. But that's perfectly relatable, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, with what I was going through as a sports parent. And I'm better now, even though she's in high school. I still kind of get antsy, and I'm not reffing or coaching or anything like that. But it took like going through those moments for me to kind of, like you said, I love what you said, be a student of my heart as far as being a parent and realizing that we got an issue here.
What's so important, Jason, about what you just shared in that beautiful story is you listen to your wife. She brought it to your attention, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't see clearly. And that's the most important thing. We see things not as they are, but as we are.
Yeah.
We see things not as they are, but as we are. And that's why Jesus says you've got to remove this massive plank in your eye if you want to see clearly, so you can help other people. My daughter played basketball, and she did it this first year for track, first year for basketball, first year for softball. It was fascinating. And after my son, who's so competitive, I was fired up. I've got all these new sports. She did it for one reason, and I didn't know it till afterwards. It was for the social life. It was for the slap each other on the back. It's for the cheering. Yeah. They do more cheering in 7th grade volleyball than they do volleyball.
Absolutely.
It's like, guys, play the game, And I would be fired up going, like, she doesn't even care.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
It's community.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Totally. So I think one of the huge things is you weren't seeing clearly, but then your God, through your wife, brought it to your attention, and you chose to do what was in your power to say, okay, I want to be aware of what's going on in me, and here's where I can channel it in a positive way. And then even to take the next step and say, what's my energy behind this? Because I think fundamentally what we find in parenting, expressed so much in sports, is we believe that our children are responsible for our happiness.
Yeah.
And that is a trap. That is a death trap for them and a death trap for us. And so one of the greatest things that we can do as coaches and as parents for our athletes and our children is to look them in their eye and demonstrate by our actions, you are loved, We stand behind you. I'm going to give you my best, and you are not responsible for my happiness. It's a monumental shift for most of our parents, and it's something that happens over time.
Super important there. Really great stuff. He is Morgan Snyder, in the new book again called Becoming a King, The Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. We could spend all day, my friend. I really appreciate it. That book is available now. You can get it everywhere books are sold. The foreword by John Eldridge, who was a guest a couple months ago, and Morgan and John have worked together for many years. I really appreciate you coming on, my friend. This was great conversation, and hopefully we'll get you back because we could talk a lot of different areas here. I had a really good time talking to you, and great to meet you. Thank you so much, Morgan.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, great to be with you.
And many thanks to Morgan Snyder, author, teacher, speaker, for joining us here today on the show. He's really good, right? Like, he had a lot of great things to say, very deep in a lot of the conversations, deeper than I thought we were going to go. And his new book is a really good one, Becoming a King, The Path to Restoring the Heart of a Man. It's out now everywhere books are found. You can check it out. And also go to their website, becomegoodsoil.com. That's Morgan's website that he established about 10 years ago in his ministry, becomegoodsoil.com. I love the idea of becoming good soil, and really where it starts is in the heart. And that's the soil, right? Really digging down deep. And I loved what he said about becoming a student of our hearts as a parent, but really a student of our hearts in general, and studying our hearts and really taking a deep look inside and what really exists in there. Morgan Snyder was fabulous. So glad that he joined us here today on Sports Spectrum. We want to thank our sponsors today, Ronald Blue Trust. Check them out for all your financial needs at ronaldblue.com. Again, ronblue.com actually is the website, ronblue.com. Check them out, Ronald Blue Trust. And again, thank you for tuning in. You can find us on our website, sportspectrum.com, and my email address again, jason@sportspectrum.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Love you guys. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.